Now, in my career, I have often asked people if they ever heard of Plato. And of course, you can imagine the responses that I get. Of course, there's always the guy in the crowd who thinks he's cute by saying, "Oh yes, I used to play with it all the time as a kid." Really funny. I've actually had an older person say that, "Isn't that somebody from a TV show called Different Strokes years ago?" I'm thinking, that's Dana Plato. But somebody will get people saying maybe it was a Disney character, and that's of course Pluto. And you can see where I'm going with this one. And then other times they'll just say, "Isn't that planet that wasn't a planet that's no longer a planet?" I'm going, that is Pluto. So I get various responses. Eventually, I get somebody who will say, "Oh, you know, isn't that the guy wearing a toga with laurel wreaths around their head?" And I'm thinking, uh, none of that is really applicable. But so the answer is just no. However, it's funny that I'm doing this talk today. It really is, because in my class earlier, I had two classes today. I had a course on religion and the quest for immortality, another one on world religions. I actually did ask the question, who is Plato? And I did get some responses. Most people said, "Isn't he the guy that's connected to the allegory of the cave?" I was just feeling so good at that moment. The allegory of the cave. Are we going to do the allegory of the cave? Yes, we are. We're going to talk about that today. So we did have some educated responses, and I'm sure that many of you here watching this will have the same kind of response. I mean, you're not here for anything having to do with Plato. Um, so, but then, of course, I asked the question. I said, "So, what else does he do?" And they said, "Well, like philosophical stuff." I mean, this is like real life application, philosophical stuff. I always like that word, stuff. It's very, very material. And maybe immaterial, but Plato was everything. And he did deal with stuff, but he also dealt with non-stuff, lack thereof stuff, the absence of stuff. But there is this transcendence of stuff. So there we have it. So I'll be talking about, this is why we call it playing with Plato, right? Oh, Ali just said, "Isn't he a wrestler?" See, I mean, we're always getting people like that. I tell you. Okay. So as you can see, the composite picture isn't pretty. So this is kind of an introduction to Plato, the Greek philosopher, and it's kind of an overview. Um, yes, I mean there's parts that need to be taken seriously, but other parts I just kind of want to play, and I want you to understand who Plato really was, to understand his philosophy and some of his influences. So take this as a lighter approach. I'm not going to have a real dead serious expression and just kind of drone on. I'm going to just explain a few things, show some pretty pictures, and then kind of go on. Okay, so the composite picture of who he is not exactly pretty. People don't really understand who he is, but he did profoundly affect uh, the entire uh, culture of the Western world. It's kind of a big thing to say. Um, and so not only, of course, in antiquity, but all the way up to today. In fact, Platonism is part and parcel of the basic foundational ideas that are preeminent for many different religions today, believe it or not. So, a lot of when it comes to Christianity, you have aspects connected to, believe it or not, Islam, the Jewish Kabbalah, philosophical neo pagans, and Gnostics, and hey, quite a bit, quite a bit. So, you also have, of course, with Platonism from Plato, you got Middle Platonism, and that's kind of a fun area. And that Middle Platonism influences Jewish thought very directly. Philo of Alexandria, right? And these ideas become kind of foundational for concepts that are related to the Kabbalah. You have Plato, as I mentioned before, connected to Christianity. I mean, hello, whether it be the Gospel of John or other places, right? There is this connection. And then, of course, when we move into Middle Platonism as well, we do have little spin-offs. I mean, Middle Platonism interacts with Hermeticism, right? It does, right? It interacts with Pythagorean ideas, so Neo-Pythagorean ideas. It's connected there. It connects to Gnostic ideas, so Gnosticism is influenced, and of course even the Chaldean oracles. So Middle Platonism, pretty dynamic. And then it moves into what? Oh, well, Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism is very important when it comes to, again, Christianity. When it comes to ideas of hypostasis and yada yada, and as a result of that, it is influenced in Trinitarian thought. So ideas of defining the idea of Christian theology. So it's influential in the Council of Nicaea, the Council of Constantinople, the Council of Ephesus, the Council of Chalcedon. I mean, it's very influential. It's very foundational. It is very influential when it comes to Eastern Orthodox thought. Uh, yeah, it is also instrumental in creating the foundational ideas that are related to, guess what? The Renaissance. It's connected to political theory and understandings. And those theories and understandings go into philosophical systems that influence the entire West. Even it goes into foundational ideas for the United States. Yes, absolutely. Plato influenced them, and Plato is everywhere. So it's worthy to play with these topics. It's so much comes from this individual. And yet, we don't know who he is. We don't take the time to get to know him. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to understand who Plato is. So, naturally, I need to begin by providing a few definitions as a general practice. I probably should need to describe who Plato is. So, the Greek philosopher Plato lived between 429 to 347 BCE. It's a very turbulent time in Greek history. Of course, when is it not, right? You know, Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian Wars, and then thank you Sparta for ruining everything for Athenians. He came from a wealthy Athenian family. And was heavily indebted to the philosopher Socrates, for many of his basic ideas. Because of that, we are going to be talking about Socrates. Now, remember, so much of we know about Socrates comes through the filtering system, the ideas of Plato. So it is Plato. All of his works appear in the form of dialogues in which he does not make a direct appearance, in a sense, directing the various topics and how they proceed from a certain amount of detachment. And you can see that's very much part of his personality. He founded a philosophical school known as the Academy, which, of course, is one of the very first educational establishments in the West. So that's a pretty interesting feather in the cap there. Now, let's delve a little bit deeper into Plato as a historical figure. Uh, we'll say that he was uh, first of all, I'm going to be using, this is kind of an interesting novel idea. I'm going to be using primary sources to describe who Plato is. I thought that's the best way of doing it. And so I skipped the secondary sources, going right for Plato. And a lot of my information does come from Diogenes Laertius, who was a writer during the 3rd century CE, but he got it from various sources. Who he does quote where he got it from oftentimes. And he states that he was born, according to some writers, I'm quoting here, in Aegina. Uh, let's take a look. We have an image of Aegina. So there we go. So you can see Aegina right there, right? You can see it's an island that's located off the south there, right? Um, It is Aegina is one of the Saronic islands of Greece in the Saronic Gulf. It's located approximately 17 miles from Athens. Um, and so this is where he was born, right? He was born in the house of Phideides, who is the son of Thales. Now, according to Diogenes Laertius, he lists as his source a certain Favoronius of Arlete, so who adds that Plato's father, Ariston, along with his family, were sent to the island to settle by the Athenians. Furthermore, they had the privilege of retaining their Athenian citizenship. So he does come from a more well to do background. Here, according to Favoronius, they remained until the Spartans expelled them soon after Plato's birth, although this is kind of disputed since there's no record of such an expulsion. But there you have it. Let's go to the next image. Take a look at this. This. Oh, look at this. This is the temple of Aphia. It's interesting. This Aphia. I know you never heard of Aphia. This is the goddess of fertility and agriculture, and this particular goddess was only worshipped on this island. It's an extremely localized kind of worship. And she was a goddess of fertility and agriculture. And they have traced her worship all the way back to the 14th century BCE. Let's go to the next picture. It really is a beautiful island. As you can see here, but all those islands in that area are very, very beautiful. So good. Okay. Of course, because of his later fame, many rather fabulous stories circulated about his birth that we cannot really take too seriously. In one version, a divinity appeared to his mom, and through this appearance, became pregnant with Plato. Now, when Ariston wished to have relations with his wife that same night, the god Apollo appeared to him and told him to leave her alone. Ariston, nevertheless, he tried to do so anyway because she was in her bloom, according to the primary source here, but failed to, quote, win her. And after that, quote, he ceased to offer his compulsion. Of course, what will happen is, so there you have it. After Plato was born, another story, go to the next image, another story tells how his parents went to sacrifice to the muses and nymphs upon Mount Hymettus. And this is the peak of Mount Hymettus right here. And you know what they did? They actually went to a cave, and they left Plato there to sleep. Believing that the muses and nymphs would have the right advice, would do the right thing that they're supposed to do. And so let's go to the next image. This is likely the cave where they say that Plato was placed for the night. This is the very cave, Vari. This is at the base of Mount Hymettus. It is a shrine dedicated to Apollo, as you would expect, because Apollo is very much a part of this story. Pan, as well as the nymphs, it was actively used. We've seen this through archaeology as early as the 6th century BCE, and it goes all the way to the 2nd century BCE. And there's evidence that it was revived in the 4th century CE. They left behind, let's go to the next image, left behind some rock carved sculptures, which are pretty interesting. Now, according to the sources here, they left Plato here, but Cicero, I told you I'm using various sources. Cicero notes that while Plato was an infant, I'm quoting from Cicero, asleep in his cradle, bees settled on his lips. And this was interpreted to mean that he would have a rare sweetness of speech. Hence, in his infancy, his future eloquence was foreseen. Unquote. So from Cicero. Um, Now let's see me for a few seconds. I just find it interesting. So the idea that the bee symbolism, right? The idea that the bees landed on his mouth, and it connects to his honeyed voice. We find in various Greek contexts the idea of somebody who is a great speaker is somebody that is known as the honeyed speaking one or the golden mouth. And so they use these terms. So, and that nature gave it to him. So the muses, right, and Apollo and Pan. So this is going to be a special natural gift. And yeah, and of course, there's other kinds of connections to it, but that are related to various mysteries. And it looks like whether or not they would leave a baby in this deep dark cave by himself. I mean, you know, they did have ideas like incubation chambers and so forth, where they did some kind of where you sleep the night and you have various dreams. But I can't imagine leaving a baby there. But hey, you know, it does seem to be a sort of initiation concept that will be placed into this narrative. So it's the old story of you just can't have a regular beginning. If you become famous later on, it's time to rewrite the way you're born. It's like, wow. I mean, Alexander the Great had that, right? He thought he was just the average son of Philip the second of Macedon, right? And then he went to the Oracle of Siwa after he's already gaining a lot of fame, right? This oracle's in the middle of the Libyan desert, and he receives the message. Oh, by the way, you know, Zeus is your father. Philip is not your father. He's like, oh my goodness, I'm I'm half God. That means I'm a hero. Yay. And of course, he saw himself as Achilles, the new Achilles. Or later on, when he started conquering further down from Asia Minor, where people didn't know who Achilles was, then he became Hercules. But the point of the matter is that here we have it. Uh, Plato has this concept of being, well, if he's born of the gods, therefore he's half God, half deity. And so he too is a hero. He too is connected to the realm in between. So he can understand these special concepts. That's why he's able to understand the nature of the universe because of this divine origin. So if you ever become well known, it's time to do some rewriting. Just work it out with mom and dad, and go from there. Okay, let's go to the next image. Plato's father, Ariston, was said to have traced back his family line back to the legendary king Cadros of Athens, who supposedly reigned from 1089 to 1068 BCE. According to ancient Greek legends, when the Dorians were invading Greece and came to Athens, the leader of them, a certain Atlantis, um, he decided that before he goes and conquers the city, I'm going to go ask the Oracle of Delphi and see if this is going to work out or not. So the Oracle informed him that as long as the king of Athens was not harmed at all, then he would be successful in taking the city. So, however, you can't keep things a secret. So the story of the Oracle spread all throughout his troops and onto the other side, to the Athenians. So it crossed enemy lines. Cadros overheard, and he also knew that there's no way the Athenians are going to beat these guys. So what are we going to do? And so what he did is he disguised himself as a peasant, and he snuck over to the enemy's territory, And then he intentionally made a Dorian soldier, actually a few of them, upset. He provoked them, right? And they immediately killed him. Ah. When Atlantis realized that his soldiers had accidentally killed the king, he knew that his plans for attack would end in a loss. I mean, the king was harmed. I mean, the king's dead, right? And so they all left. That's the story. Of course, what will happen is Cadros became a hero. I mean, he willingly uh, left his life down to be killed, right? And so after that, the Athenians decided that any leader who followed Cadros could not be called a king, uh, for nobody can measure up to Cadros. Whether this is true or not, but this is part of Plato's backgrounds, part of his pedigree, and as a result of that, um, Plato's blood is blue blood. He is part of the Athenian aristocracy. Plato's mother, next image, Perictione, was a direct descendant of Solon, the great lawgiver of Athens. You know, Solon, by the way. So on one side, you got Cadros, this sacrificial king. And on the mom's side, you got Solon, the great lawgiver. Solon was considered one of the seven wise men of Greece. He became chief magistrate around 594 BCE. He repealed the harsh draconian laws. He created an oligarchy with a sliding scale of rights. He also, what he did is that with this, he made the wealthy happy, and to compensate, he canceled the debts of the poor. That made them happy. He created the idea of trial by jury, according to some sources. He enacted a reform that enabled those who had special talents, but who were not Athenians, that they could receive citizenship if they stayed to contribute to the polis, to the city. So the idea is, if you have a special gift, whatever it may be, but you're a foreigner, you're not an Athenian, but you're really good at something, practice that trade here because we want your gifts, we want your abilities, and we want anybody who's able to, well, make us more wealthy, but to make the city flourish. And he created this policy. This policy was very instrumental in making Athens stand out against the rest. It was its very pluralism, openness to bringing all these people from all these different places with all kinds of gifts that did make Athens a great city. Yeah, and eventually a city that is very much a leader, especially throughout the 400s BCE. Okay, so that's a big deal. Also, he created the first. I guess the best way to say it is elementary school system. You know, he was like the principal of a school. He believed that maybe kids should be educated outside of their homes. It didn't last very long, but it's an idea. I think it's fun, the trial by jury thing. So every time you get that notice in the mail, you can say, "Hey, thank you so long." Okay. There's Solon there. He doesn't look very happy. Oh, one little fun thing is he pushed through this constitution, and he made sure that everybody would agree with it. And he says, if you want to make any changes, you can, but I have to be present. And they all agreed. Okay. And then he left for 10 years. It's like, what? Why we can't change it? Because he figured, it takes a little while for these ideas to sink in. So there you have it. Okay, uh, that's pretty good. Let's go to the next image. Plato was definitely not an only child. For Ariston and Perictone had two other sons together. So I like this image, but I think I meant to have this go later on. Let's pull this down. So first son you had, it was Edemontus. Adeimantus was his elder brother. And of course, the next brother down was Glaucon, who was older than himself. And there also was a daughter, Poton. Along with Plato, both his brothers and later became followers of Socrates. And from Plato's dialogues, we can get an idea of what they were like. Um, so Plato's not the first to be a follower of Socrates. Is his older brothers became followers too. In a sense, Plato then followed in turn, right? Now, Adeimantus, we know a little less about him, but I'll bring him up first. He's the oldest brother. He was the pragmatist. He's always wishing the most realistic answer possible. And I have to say, he's less creative than Plato about various solutions in life. He sometimes comes off as sounding a bit greedy and very materialistic, uncertain that sacrificing um, on your own personal possessions was really one that would lead to happiness. He says, why would you sacrifice anything? We need to enjoy the material world. We need to have simple, concrete answers for everything in life. It must be utilitarian. And this is the way his mind thought, right? This is the way it worked. Well, what about Glaucon? Well, Glaucon, on the other hand, was more carefree. He was the musician of the family. He loved to study Pythagoras and his musical theories to the point of being an expert on questions regarding harmonics and the music of the stars in general. Glaucon also was into animal husbandry, with Socrates once telling him, "You have in your house a number of hunting dogs and a number of pedigreed cocks." Unquote. Glaucon, like Adeimantus, also enjoyed material things. He enjoyed lots of finery. While more creative than his older brother to a degree, he was very, very emotional and quick to make judgments. While Adeimantus was more serious and more calm, very pragmatic, Glaucon was one to just kind of fly off the handle, you know, and make these very quick judgments about people and things, while his older brother is more measured and careful. Right? Aristotle said of Glaucon, quote, "The true mode of interpretation is the precise opposite of what Glaucon mentions. Critics," he says, "jump at certain groundless conclusions. They pass adverse judgments and then proceed to reason on it, and assuming that the poet has said whatever they happen to think, find fault if a thing is inconsistent with their own fancy." Unquote. So you get an idea. Now, can you imagine? You know, you have you have Plato here between these two brothers, kind of a sullen pragmatist, very methodical, not very creative, just want things to work, and kind of materialistic. And then you have the artsy next brother who's kind of flying off the handle and acting kind of crazy and coming up. And Plato, what is he doing? He's listening. Huh? Yeah. He's watching his two older brothers. I can imagine them sitting around the dinner table, and they did, or reclining around it. And he'd sit there, and we know that they would have these conversations. And he's learning. One thing about Plato, which is interesting, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, he didn't talk that much at first. He was a listener. I know it kind of throws you off. A quiet listener is somebody who changes the course of all Western civilization. You got to watch out for those quiet ones. You really do. Because they're thinking. You don't know what they're thinking, but they're thinking. And eventually they're going to say something. And that's what's going to happen soon. But during this phase of his life, he decided that he's going to take the position of just being a listener. I think we can learn from this. It's interesting because even in forms in Hinduism, you have the various stages of life, the four stages of life, and they have the first stage is connected to that which is the student. And the student at this point just sits and he listens, he learns. Sure, he asks questions, but he sits and learns. He absorbs this information, getting ready for the time to move to the second stage. Plato is doing the same. Okay, so let's get of course, we're going to get a story of Glaucon uh, from, of course, Plato. And so, and so at one point, Glaucon told Socrates in the work known as Plato's Republic that justice was often an abstraction. Justice was often just simply an ideal that was not important for its own sake, but rather for how it is applied by those who have the power, right? So, once again, justice is often an abstraction, it's just an ideal, right? You can see how Glaucon would do that in his personality type, right? It's not that important for its own sake, but rather for how it is applied to those who have power. So, those people who have the power can make the rules. Justice then was about power and opportunity, but not important for its own sake, right? Next, Glaucon tells a story about the ring of invisibility, supposedly found by an ancestor of Gyges. Let's take a look at the next image. The story tells how one day this shepherd who worked for the king of Lydia was out tending his sheep when suddenly an earthquake rocked the region. As a result, part of the side of a mountain crumbled away, leaving a cave behind. The cave turned out to be an ancient tomb where the corpse was entombed inside of a bronze horse. Immediately, the shepherd noticed a gold ring on the corpse's finger, and he quickly pocketed it. When then later on, he decided to put it on, he suddenly became invisible after twisting it a certain way. So the shepherds asked the others if he could go to the king and tell him how his flocks were doing, and the others agreed. Okay, next image. Gaining access to the palace, he slipped on the ring, became invisible, and then showed himself before the queen instead, seducing her and professing his love. This went on for a time as he gained more power through her, and then, when the time was right, they formed a plot to kill the king, and so he became king in his place. Wow, a ring of invisibility. I'm sure today's popular culture never heard of such a thing. Oh, it has? Yeah, that's right. This is one of the inspirations behind, yeah, the Lord of the Rings. Yeah. All right. So Glaucon states concerning the ring of invisibility. He says, suppose now that there were two such magic rings, and just put on one of them, and so the just put on one of them, I should say the righteous, so that way it makes more sense in English. The righteous will put on one of them, and the unrighteous or the unjust the other. Now, no man can be imagined to be of such an iron nature, he says, that he would stand fast in justice. No man would keep his hands off what was not his own when he could safely take what he liked out of the market, or go into houses and lie with anyone at his pleasure, or kill or release from prison whom he would, and in all respects be like a god amongst men. Then the actions of the just will be as the actions of the unjust. So the actions of the righteous will be the same as the unrighteous. they would both come at last to the same point. So basically, we just can't handle that temptation. And this we may truly affirm to be a great proof, says Glaucon, that a man is righteous or just not willingly or because he thinks that justice is any good to him individually, but of necessity. For wherever anyone thinks that he can safely be unjust, there he is unjust. For all men believe in their hearts that injustice is far more profitable, to the individual than justice. And he who argues, as I have been supposing, will say that they are right. If you could imagine anyone obtaining this power, becoming invisible, and never doing any wrong or touching what was another's, he would be thought of by looker-ons to be the most wretched of idiots, although they would praise him to one another's faces and keep up the appearances with one another from fear that they too might suffer injustice. Unquote. That's the Republic 360b through D. So there you have it. What would you do, right? Says Glaucon. Does he have a ring that grants total invisibility? No one knows you have it. You're totally free to act in any way you desire without suffering social or legal judgment. Would you use it? Uh-oh. Would you use it? Would there be limits on its use? We'll say, well, maybe I'll just use it for this, but nothing else. Why not use it to satisfy your every desire? Gain power, crush your enemies, right? You have any foes? You can take care of it, and no one would ever know because you have the ring of invisibility. See, you can tell what kinds of conversations Plato had with his brothers, this Glaucon one, right? As an example. Okay, well, guess what? Plato sets up Socrates, because remember, he always distances himself from these conversations. So he situates Socrates as being his point of view, which is very convenient because many scholars who study Socrates say, well, it's just Socrates is just Plato, with the with the guy under the guise of this person. So a lot of people are looking for the real Socrates. I believe that Socrates said much of what Plato says he did, but I do think that there are still lots of additions. But here we go. So naturally, Socrates disagrees with Glaucon, stating that true justice does not arise from society, an elusive social construct, but from beyond. There's something beyond. The shepherd was not freed by the ring of invisibility to do as he pleased, but was, in fact, a prisoner of his own insatiable appetites, his own greed. And this could only lead to unhappiness, for these kinds of desires ultimately lead to dissatisfaction and the need for still more and more, right? Gollum, Gollum, right? Lord of the Rings reference, right? So it will corrupt you. This ultimate power is too much. You can't handle it. No, says Socrates, the happy man is the one who does not even put on the ring and controls his appetites. Frodo, my precious, says Margie, right? The just man then does not even put on that ring, and that is the right choice. That's the choice you're supposed to make, right? But you can again get a piece of the feel from that time of where people were at. Okay, let's get see me for a little bit there. Thank you. So I think we're understanding already Plato quite a bit. As for Plato's father, he never had a chance to really get to know him. He died soon after Plato was born because Athenian law did not permit women to lack a legal male guardian. This is pretty upsetting. His mom, Peritone, had to be remarried. And 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 under another man. This again, this is just a patriarchal system that was Athenian society. Now, in order to keep the wealth and status within the family, she was actually married to her own uncle, her mother's brother, a certain Pyrolampas, and who was a close friend of the powerful Pericles of Athens and a distinguished ambassador to the Persian court. So, um, Pyrolampas had been married before and had a son um, by her by the name of Demas, who was considered exceedingly handsome. But his wife died, and so he was ready for to get married again. Together, he and his niece actually had a child together by the name of Antiphon. In his spare time, next image, Priolampus raised peacocks, and he absolutely loved peacocks. But this is just the story's going downhill. But he also knows that women liked peacocks too, and so he often took advantage of how many women were drawn to these peacocks. So Prialepus used to get to know these women as they watched these beautiful birds enough to find out if they're freeborn so that he could bring them to his buddy Pericles to satisfy his various appetites. I don't think he's the greatest of people, but there you have it. But hey, you got a pretty image of a peacock, right? Plato's step brother, Antiphon, once pursued philosophy like Plato and his brothers, but sharing his father's love of animals, he decided to devote his life to raising them, in this case, horses. So eventually they're going to be moving, next image, to Athens. Okay, so the household of Plato with two brothers, a sister, an older half brother, and a younger half brother. They're in Athens. So I guess they moved before because by his birth. But Plato saw this time with his two brothers, sister, older half brother, younger half brother, as a very happy time. He did. And while he did have sharp disagreements with his siblings, especially his two older brothers, he often honored them and included them in his later dialogues. They were a philosophical family for the most part, enjoying lively conversations, debating one another back and forth, playing point and counterpoint. This is just a typical house, an Athenian house at that time, and it is highly likely that he lived in a place, a house that was similar to this one. As for where Plato fit in this mix, um, well, he was very intelligent, but very modest, with Appius saying that the quote, first fruits of his youth were infused with hard work and love of study. So he loved to read, he loved to compose letters. Of his early education, Diogenes Laertius states he was taught letters in the school of Dionysius, who is mentioned by him in The Rivals. And he learned gymnastics under Aristoton, the Argive wrestler. Speaking of which, next image, it turned out that Plato thought maybe he found something here. He went from just simply being a kind of a reading egghead to, hey, you know what? I kind of want to do some wrestling. I'm pretty good at this. And so he did become a wrestler in as well. In fact, Diogenes Laertius says that many mentioned that he wrestled in the Isthmian Games. Yeah, this is stated by also Diarchus in his first book on lives. So he did love to wrestle. I guess maybe that was he was thinking maybe this could be not his vocation. Well, maybe he did. I mean, who knows? It's interesting how life just kind of throws us off a little bit there, right? Okay, but at the same time, let's look at me for a little bit. At the same time, He not only loved the games, but he loved the arts. Again, Diogenes Laertius notes he applied himself to painting and wrote poems and lyric poems and tragedies. I mean, he was good at it. This was his gift. I mean, he could do that. He's a great wrestler. He's great at composing letters and poetry. He's great at painting. Plato's talented. But but there's one thing he didn't have. He didn't have a strong voice. I know, but the stories and legends talk about these bees on his lips, right? And he's going to have this honeyed, wonderful voice. But at first, his voice wasn't that strong. He had a weak voice. This is very curious considering his later reputation. Diogenes Laertius notes, I'm quoting, he had, they say, a weak voice. This is confirmed by Timotheus the Athenian in his book on lives. I'm just quoting here. It is stated that Socrates, in a dream, saw a young swan on his knees, which all at once put forth plumage and flew away after uttering a loud, sweet note. And the next day, Plato was introduced as a pupil, and thereupon he was recognized in him as the swan of his dreams. Well, this story indicates that it was weak, weak, and then all of a sudden it got strong. So it's interesting, right? All of a sudden, it was there. Okay. So next, Plato moved on to higher education. As recorded by Diogenes Laertius. Diogenes does quite a bit on his early life. At first, he used to study philosophy, and afterwards in the Garden of Colonus. Apparently, Plato wished to hold public office, and he was and be involved in the politics of Athens as a career. He was invited by the 30 tyrants, uh, Critia and Carmenides, who were amongst their leaders, to join them, but he refused. That was a smart move. They were a pro Spartan oligarchy created after Athens lost the war with Sparta. This is following the Peloponnesian War, which ended in 404 BCE. I mean, there's just a big mess. And Sparta, they were the bad guys, right? And it's a smart move. Don't associate yourself with them. But dreams of a public life and everything else changed when Plato met Socrates. Let's look at next image. Afterwards, when he's about to, I'm quoting a primary source. Um, Afterwards, when he was about to compete for the prize with a tragedy, so it looks like he went on to write his plays. He listened to Socrates at the front of the theater of Dionysus, which is this theater that you're looking at right here. After hearing Socrates, he then, quote, consigned his poems to the flames with the words, come hither, O fire god. Plato now has need of thee. From that time onward, having reached his 20th year, so it is said, he became a pupil of Socrates. So that's how it starts. It is the words of Socrates that compels him to follow. So let's go to the next image. Well, so who was Socrates? In general, of course, Socrates, who lived from 469 to 399 BC, was a famous sophist living in the 5th century Athens, who fervently believed that the ideals of truth and happiness could be discovered through the practice of continual inquiry, asking questions constantly about the nature of reality. Next, once realized, truth and happiness could be attained through the pursuit of excellence in all things. The methodology of inquiry he applied was what is today called the Socratic method, and he championed a belief in the importance of critical thought. Of course, Socrates made himself the quintessential example of his own philosophy, so that he also taught by example as well as in his words. He believed one was to practice what they taught, otherwise, they were not worth following. Much of what we know about Socrates and how we understand him is via the writings of Plato. You see, Socrates left no writings of his own, and Plato, along with a few others, like Xenophon and the playwright Aristophanes, were the only ones who recorded his life and teachings. But most of it is essentially Plato. In this sense, the influence and legacy of Socrates is forever tied to his foremost pupil, and that, of course, is Plato himself. As for his background, Socrates, well, he grew up in the home of a certain sculptor by the name Sepharonicus. His mother was a midwife by occupation, by named Farinate, which means she who brings virtue to light, a name that would actually represent her son's life goals, right? Socrates learned much from his mother. In fact, Socrates often esteemed women in many of his teachings. In fact, Socrates lists two women that were very influential in his life. Next image. First, there was Diotima of Mantinea. She was a philosopher, a priestess, and kind of a seer who is only mentioned by Plato, but most scholars agree she was a historical figure. There is exceptions. She taught him the true philosophical meanings of love. Accordingly, in fact, in his symposium, it goes as follows. Socrates states that Diotima taught her divine abilities through her divine abilities, was able to postpone the great plague of Athens for once by bidding the Athenians offer sacrifices 10 years before the plague, and she procured them so much delay in the advent of the sickness. It is said, when the topic of love came up, next image, Socrates told her that Socrates said to her that love, as a student, love was a great god and was of beautiful things. And accordingly, Socrates is said to have said that she refuted me. What a shock, right? And so what happened is that Socrates was in shock. How do you mean, Diotima? Said I. Is love then ugly and bad? Diotima responded, peace for shame, she replied. Or do you imagine that whatever is not beautiful must needs to be ugly, and what is not skilled, ignorant? Have you not observed that there is something halfway between skill and ignorance? She continues, you know, of course, that to have a correct opinion, if you can give no reason for it, is neither full knowledge. How can an unreasoned thing be knowledge, nor yet ignorance? For what hits on the truth cannot be ignorance. So correct opinion, I take it, is just in that position between understanding and ignorance. Then do not compel what is not beautiful to be ugly, she said, or what is not good to be bad. Likewise in love, when you find yourself admitting that he is not good nor beautiful, do not therefore suppose he must be ugly and bad, but something between the two. So she is destroying the idea of this forced duality. Right. This idea that if it's not one thing, then it has to be the other. That there is this realm that is in between the two. Next image. There is this place for either, right? You can see there. While Socrates told Diotima how people thought love was a god, she told them that this is not possible, for it was agreed that the gods were good and beautiful. But since love is not, love is then not a god. Yet love is not immortal either. No, Diotima said, that love was something else. It is a great spirit, Socrates, for the whole of the spiritual is between divine and mortal. As for love's power, it is interpreting and transporting human things to the gods. You got to listen to this because you can see this is the beginning of so much about Plato. It is interpreting and transporting human things to the gods and divine things to men, entreaties and sacrifices from below, and ordinances and requitos from above, being midway between it. It makes each to supplement the other, as that the whole is combined into one. Though it through it are conveyed all divination and priestcraft concerning sacrifice and ritual and incantations and all soothsaying and sorcery, God with man does not mingle, but the spiritual is the means of all society and converse of men with gods and of gods with men, whether waking or asleep. Whoever has skill in these affairs is a spiritual man. To have it in other matters, as is common arts and crafts, is for the mechanical. Many and multifarious are these spirits, and one of them is called love. And you're going, wait, what's going on here? Now, this is what's important. Look at me for a second. I want you to understand this. So, what you're having here with Diotima is this concept that there is this attraction. Love is an attraction. It is a gravitational force that is moving us towards the gods. But it occupies this realm in between the object that is the gods and, of course, humanity. It is that which pulls it together. It's an in-between state. Why that is important is the fact that this is the beginning of a notion of a realm in between that which is spiritual and that which is material. It is the beginning of that divine gravity. It's the beginning of the idea of a pleroma, the idea of emanations that are moving down, but also we ourselves are moving up. You guys got it? Right? And this is a very important idea. Well, the kernel, the beginning of that idea, arise through Diotima. That's where this idea comes from. And I think that is so important. Socrates asked who were the parents of love. Diotima responded, "That is a rather long story." She replied, "But still I will tell you. When Aphrodite was born, the gods made a great feast, and amongst the company were Resource, the son of Cunning. And when they banqueted there came Poverty a begging, as well as she might in an hour of good cheer, and she hung out about the door. Now Resource had grown tipsy with nectar, for wine as yet there was none, went into the garden of Zeus, and there, overcome with heaviness, slept. Then Poverty, being of herself so resourceless, devised the scheme of having a child by Resource, and lying down by his side, she conceived Love. Hence it is that Love from the beginning has been attendant and minister to Aphrodite, since he was begotten on the day of her birth, and is moreover by nature a lover bent on beauty, since Aphrodite is beautiful. Now, as the son of Resource and Poverty, Love is a very peculiar case. First, he is ever poor and far from tender or beautiful as most suppose him. Rather, he is hard and parched, shoeless and homeless. On the bare ground always he lies with no bedding, and takes his rest on doorsteps and waysides in the open air. True to his mother's nature, he ever dwells with want. But he takes after his father in scheming for all that is beautiful and good, for he is brave, strenuous, and high strung, a famous hunter, always weaving some stratagem, desirous and competent of wisdom throughout life, ensuing the truth, a mastery of jugglery, and an artful speech. By birth, neither immortal nor mortal, in the self same day he is flourishing and alive at the hour when he is abandoning in Resource. At another he is dying and then reviving again by force of his father's nature. Yet the resource that he gets will ever be ebbing away, so that Love is at no time either resourceless or wealthy, and furthermore, he stands midway between wisdom and ignorance. The position is this: no God ensue wisdom or desire to be made wise, such they are already, nor does anyone else that is wise ensue it. Neither did the ignorant ensue wisdom, nor desire to be made wise, and this very point is ignorance distressing. When a person who is not comely or worthy or intelligent is satisfied with himself, Now, the man who does not feel himself defective has no desire for whereof he feels no defect. And you're wondering, okay, so how do I understand this? It sounds okay. So love is connected to what? Resource and poverty. Doesn't realize you're going, but okay, this is I don't get this story. Well, you're gonna get the story right now. How? Think about it. So it is, in a sense, in this world, in this material world, we are what? We are, in a sense, not connected to that which is spirit. I see where we're going with this, right? So we are, in a sense, we're poor, but we know intuitively. This is Plato, of course. We know intuitively that there is more, and so we seek. We wish to have more. We try to gain, but that in this material world, we are not complete. We're incomplete. We are limited, and so we are drawn, ever drawn further up by love to find completeness. Now you're getting it. And you heard the story, you're going, okay, got it. And so, yes, we are, in a sense, in poverty in this realm, but we are seeking through our resourcefulness to find the answer. And that, of course, is through love, and, of course, the transcendence that results from that. Is this kind of cool stuff? But, ancient talk is not always the easiest thing. Let's go to the next image. So there you have that. Okay, here we go. I want to bring this up. So, Diotima. So you can see these are main ideas that are part of Platonism. So we're looking at the beginning threads of Platonism, and you're seeing it being woven here. As far as we have other backgrounds, we'll talk about that soon. But we see here the moving through the physical, and then the emotional, and then the spiritual. Go for eros, instinctual love, platonic, philia, and agape. Let's go to the next one. Here is Diotima's ladder. Okay, so we love one beautiful person and beget noble sentiments with it. So we love somebody who's beautiful. It doesn't have to be always. It has, it's love of the whole person, uh, inner and outer. Next step was realize beauty is similar in all persons, and then love all beautiful bodies. The next level up, beauty of soul outweighs beauty of the body. This is what I just talked about a few minutes ago. Next, we see beauty in activities, institutions, and sciences. And then moving on, gazing on the ocean of beauty of the sciences, we beget finer ideas. And then, of course, beauty is revealed to us, and we contemplate the form of beauty. So we are moving. Diotima's ladder in Plato's Symposium is this gradual movement further up. So through through these images in the material world, it will lead us further up in a metaphysical sense, up this ladder into contemplating. Of course, Plato will put this into the realm of the forms, and eventually that which is the good, or also understood as the monad. Isn't that fun? Okay. So there you have that. The next image, here we go. Okay, so there is another woman that also influenced uh, uh, Socrates. Her name is Aspasia, who is the mistress of the famous Pericles. Uh, she taught Socrates the art of rhetoric in a very masterful way. She's born in Miletus along the Ionian coast. Aspasia came to Athens as a hetairai. This is a hetairai is basically an educated, sophisticated female companion, sometimes understood as a courtesan. Because of their educated status, they were permitted to attend symposium that women were not, but they were. Most scholars agree that Aspasia ran a brothel, but her house held so many symposia that it actually became an academic center of learning in Athens. Pericles and Aspasia, actually, Pericles of Athens actually had a son together, Pericles the younger. Plutarch states, quote, now since it is thought that he proceeded thus against the Samians to gratify Aspasia, this may be a fitting place to raise the query what great art or power this woman had, that she managed as she pleased the foremost men of the state, and afforded the philosophers occasion to discuss her in exalted terms and at great length. This is Plutarch, right? So writing in the second century, first to second century CE, but this is quite a statement that she was a very powerful woman, right? Lucian of Samosata from the second century CE writes, we could choose no better model of wisdom than the Milesian Aspasia, the admired of the admirable Olympian. Her political knowledge and insight, her shrewdness and penetration shall all be transferred to our canvas in their perfect measure. Aspasia, however, is only preserved to us in miniature. Our proportions must be those of a colossus. Unquote. Wow. So again, this is unusual praise during a patriarchal age of this woman of great influence. But because of her occupation, of course, many in Athens believed she was guilty of impiety and for corrupting the young women of Athens. And so she's actually put on trial at one point. Next image. But she was exonerated. Those who hated her based on the fact that she was a woman and a heterae in a position of power called her all sorts of names, sometimes even Helen of Troy or Hera, and even blamed her for starting the Peloponnesian War, which of course is absolutely ludicrous. Okay. There's another woman that influenced Socrates. Let's go to the next image. And that's Xanthippe. Who's Xanthippe? His wife. Socrates was married. She was 40 years his junior. They had three children together. Plato characterizes Socrates' wife as a devoted wife and mother. The funny thing is that Socrates said that he actually chose his wife because of her ability to argue. Although how he says that is not exactly the best way, but I'll just quote it. He says, it is the example of the writer who wishes to become an expert horseman. None of your soft-mouthed, docile animals for me, he says. The horse for me to own must show some spirit, unquote. So what happened is that he believed that because she was an excellent arguer, they constantly fought. It enabled him to be a great arguer in person in public. So, so it basically would sharpen his rhetorical tools, so to speak, at home, so he could really deliver in person. So she always kept him on his toes, and so there is, like I said, you just can't make this up. Okay, let's go to me a little bit. Okay, so when his father died, Socrates inherited enough money to become financially independent and so was not required to work, at least full time for survival. This freedom enabled Socrates to pursue philosophy full time. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm not sure how, I mean, Socrates looked down the nose on various sophists because uh, they were paid for teaching their philosophies. And they're saying, well, a true philosopher shouldn't need to be paid for his services. But here's the thing: is that Socrates could afford to do so because Socrates he got money. He got money in the bank, so he didn't have to. And so maybe it's a little unfair for these poor for teachers. They just want to get a wage, man, and so that's what's kind of going on here. But anyway, um, so various teachers, other ones also influenced Socrates. Also, you have Athenagoras, for example, from Miletus. Now, as for his target audience, Socrates focused on the aristocratic youth of Athens. Socrates was even more popular because, as I mentioned, he did not charge for his teachings. Everything he taught was available to all and absolutely free. And of course, he said he was not there for any kind of financial gain. But for Socrates, all was to be above board, public, and intended for all who wished to hear. Again, magnanimous, but he did have a fortune that he was sitting on. And what did Socrates teach his followers? We are fortunate that Plato took the time and tried his best to present an accurate record of his teacher as much as possible in his early dialogues. Later on, however, Plato elaborated, presented Socrates in the form of what would or could he be saying. So that becomes a little problematic. Okay, so let's go to the first image. Socrates taught his pupils to question their assumptions. Yes. He told them not to always trust what they were taught, even if it was traditional. In fact, especially if it was traditional, for truth needed to be tested through constant inquiry. The means to a certain fact from fiction, truth from falsehood, was through the dialectical method. Through this critical skill, what was assumed to be true often became simple guesswork and tradition. Socrates told them that many popular opinions, taken for granted as truth, had very little support. Confidence could only be gained if ideas and beliefs were carefully questioned. To address the search for truth, he devised what would later become known as the Socratic method. Let's go to the next image, where various questions are posed to a select group of people. Next, solutions to the questions are posed with those hypotheses that have possible contradictions eliminated. And through a process of elimination, the best possible answer should emerge. However, by doing so, so much of what is commonly believed then suddenly enters into the realm of supposition. Here you have the 5 stages of the Socratic dialogue. So first of all, you have the idea of wonder. So receive what the other person has to say. Listen to their view or premise. I think a lot of people today have a problem with this first step. What will happen is that as opposed to really listening to what somebody is saying, we are rehearsing what we already think that they're going to be saying and getting ready so that we can immediately reply without hearing the small details or nuances. So the idea is to actually fully listen and suspend your own arguments for a period of time with an open mind. Number 2, reflect, sum up the person's viewpoint and clarify your understandings of what you have heard. The next step is, after hearing it, then you kind of repeat it back to them to make sure you understand that fully. It's kind of interesting because this is oftentimes used in psychology and marriage counseling and all these kind of places where it's like, the husband or wife says this is what they want, and they have the husband and wife repeat back, can you make sure that they understand what it says? So you got to reflect upon it. Number 3, refine and cross-examine. Ask the person to provide evidence that supports their views. Discover the thoughts, assumptions, and facts underlying their beliefs. And then, at that point, only then challenge these assumptions to test their validity. Number 4, restate. Note the new assumption resulting from the inquiry. What is the result of all this? And finally, repeat. Start back at the beginning with the new assumptions. This process helps drill down to the core issues to arrive at the best version of whatever you happen to be looking for. And so this is how things work. Okay. Second, next image, Socrates, through making his students question their assumptions via the dialectical method, hoped they would realize that ultimately so much of what we know is simply illusion, that we had to accept the fact that we were indeed ignorant about most things, and as a result should become humble in this regard. And I kind of like this particular image. It kind of gives you the Greek behind it. but the questioner and the respondent. Okay, next image. Third, of course, is that Socrates believed that once we accepted that we do not know everything, that we cannot ever comprehend all the mysteries of the universe, we are now open to gain real knowledge, learning the valid universal truths lying just below the surface that are not obvious when so many false assumptions bury it. And so here resides truth. Okay, so gradually, this is kind of a cool chart, and you have this reflexive loop. Our beliefs affect what data we select next time. Isn't that true? When it comes to our own little world that we create for ourselves, our little echo chambers. And it starts out, I take actions based on my beliefs. I adopt beliefs about the world. I draw conclusions. I make assumptions based on the meanings I added. I add meanings, cultural and personal. I select data from what I observe, observable data and experiences, as a videotape recording might capture it. So we do these conclusions. And so what happens is that Socrates is bringing us down to the core, stripping us down. So next image. So, what does he want? This is an image from the city of Ephesus on the library of Celsus. This is Arete. So, Socrates' truth was tied to understanding, which is virtue, moving against the common perception. Socrates told all that virtue had to be taught, that it was not inborn, and that virtue was not an inherited trait. A virtuous father did not always have a virtuous son. A person chose to be virtuous. They chose to do that which is right. They chose to not take and put on that ring of invisibility. It's a choice. We have the choice of whether to be good people or bad people. Okay. Another example, Pericles was considered virtuous, but his offspring, not so much. So this is an example of that, right? Okay, so um, next image. At one point, Socrates declared, I know one thing. And what is that? I know nothing. This statement was said to originate from the Pythia of the Oracle of Delphi, and was said to be in response to the question, who is the wisest man in Greece? In the Apology, Plato states, this man, on one hand, believes that he knows something while not knowing anything. On the other hand, I, equally ignorant, do not believe that I know anything. Also, Socrates states in the Meno, he says, so now I do not know what virtue is. Perhaps you knew before you contacted me, but now you certainly like one who does not know. And Bess said, I am wiser than this man, for neither of us appear to know anything great and good. But he fancies he knows something, although he knows nothing. Whereas I, as I do not know anything, so I do not fancy I do. In this trifling particular, then, I appear to be wiser than he, because I do not fancy I know what I do not know. Okay, there we go. You got, in essence, Socrates taught that we must first come to realize that we do not know anything, and that the world is full of wonder and full of complete knowledge. Being full of complete knowledge is impossible. From this humility, virtue may grow its roots. Furthermore, much of doing, and evil in general was based upon ignorance, either unwilling or willingly ignorant. And then we come up with this next story, and this is a great story. Next image, and this says a lot. Oh yes, the Euthyphro dilemma. Okay, Socrates encounters this Euthyphro outside the court of Athens. What happened here is Socrates was called to court on charges of impiety by a certain Miletus, and Euthyphro had come to prosecute. He came to the same court to prosecute his own father. for unintentionally killing a murderous hired hand. So he had a hired hand and he unintentionally killed him. Socrates flatters Euthyphro, suggesting that he must be a great expert in religious matters if he is willing to prosecute his own father on such an unquestionable charge. Euthyphro concurs that he does indeed know all there is to be known about what is holy. Euthyphro concurs that he does know everything about this. You can see where we're going with this one. Socrates urges Euthyphro to instruct him. Well, if you know everything about that which is holy, can you go ahead and teach me? And maybe your teaching can help me in my case. So Euthyphro he says, well, holiness is persecuting religious offenders. Socrates is just not sure about this, found it very unsatisfying. Says there are many holy deeds aside from that of persecuting offenders, right? So he asks Euthyphro instead to give him a general definition that identifies that one feature. Give me one feature that is holy. What are holy deeds that all holy deeds share in common? Euthyphro suggests that that which is holy is agreeable to the gods. That which is holy is agreeable to the gods. Socrates responds. He says, "Well, he says, but the gods kind of quarrel, don't they? So what is agreeable to one may not be agreeable to all of them." Euthyphro, most important attempt to define holiness comes with a suggestion that what is holy is, again, what is approved by all the gods. If the gods all approve of it, then this is holy. Socrates sets up kind of an elaborate argument because he's kind of setting things up to show that the two cannot be equivalent to one another. What is holy gets approved of by the gods because it is holy. So what is holy determines what gets approved of by the gods. And what gets approved of by the gods in turn demonstrates what is approved of and by the gods. It follows from this reasoning that what is holy cannot be the same thing as what is approved by the gods, since one of these two determine what gets approved of by the gods, and the other is determined by what gets approved of by the gods. It's like, oh, no. So you can see right here, look at the little chart right here. It's a dilemma, right? And he says a divine command theory is the view that morality is somehow dependent upon God, and that moral obligation consists in the obedience to the God's commands, right? And so is something morally right because God commands it, or does God command it because it is morally right? And you see this dilemma, right, going on. Well, you see, you can feel the great frustration on the other hand. You try, so Euthyphro is next led to suggest, well, that holiness is a kind of justice, specifically that kind which concern with looking after the gods. I'll say it one more time. That holiness is a kind of justice, specifically that kind which is concerned with looking after the gods. Socrates wonders why Euthyphro means by looking after the gods. Surely the gods are omnipotent and don't need to be looked after or helped in any way. Euthyphro's final suggestion is that holiness is a kind of trading with the gods. Oh, this is a good one. Where we give them sacrifices and they grant our prayers. Our sacrifices do not help them in any way, but simply gratify them. But, next image, but Socrates points out to say that holiness is gratifying, that holiness is gratifying the gods is similar to saying that holiness is what is approved by the gods, which leads us all the way back to our previous conundrum. Rather than try to find a better definition, Euthyphro leaves off in a huff, frustrated by Socrates' questioning. Yeah, this is a cartoon, perfect, But Euthyphro, you have only gone around in a circle and have not explained piety at all. Excuse me, I've got to go now. I'm done. Well, you can see that this possibly could make some people upset. And that's what's going to start to happen. Let's look at me for a little bit. So he does this a lot. There is nothing sacred. There's nothing that. So any topic about religion, about politics, about society in general, he's going to question anything, everything, using this strategy. His students absolutely loved him. Their parents certainly did not, with many believing that he is corrupting them by asking them to question everything they were taught. The problem was that his students applied their newfound critical thinking skills in all kinds of contexts, and for many, this became a threat to society. His contemporary, the playwright Aristophanes, presents Socrates as a clown in his play The Clouds, showing them how they may escape their debts through their ability to argue their way out of it. I can't say they can just, they're learning. He's teaching these kids how to argue, and it's driving us crazy. It's got to stop. This was made all the worse by the fact that he was already a somewhat controversial figure in a political sense, where he had associated with those who stood against the democratic regime before the defeat by Sparta. So these associations got him in trouble. And of course, another unfortunate situation for Socrates is that, two of his former students, Alcides and Critias, had overthrown the democratic government at one point, and they ruled poorly, which is an understatement. And so this caused a big problem. And so we get to the next image. Eventually, the Athenian jury found Socrates guilty of atheism, right? And corrupting the youth of Athens in the year 399 BCE. The jury consisted of 500 Athenian citizens, and they met at the very center of Athens, out in the open for all to witness. So let's go to, even though this is a famous image, let's go to the next one. And this is more likely what the image was. Well, Socrates received 3 hours to defend himself. Um, you know, um, I have to tell you, things are not going very well. You see, after hearing both sides, the jurists went forward and placed a small disc in either the urn with the word guilty written on it or to another one with the words not guilty on it. Socrates was found guilty by a vote 280 to 220. And so now it was time for his sentencing. His accusers demanded him to be put to death. Socrates next came onto the stand to state that what he thought his punishment should be. Socrates was supposed to ask for exile. Let's look at me for a second. Socrates was supposed to ask for exile. If he did so, he'd be free to go. But Socrates thought by doing so, he would not be true to his teachings, for he believed he did nothing wrong at all. How could teaching people critical thinking skills and to emphasize the idea of virtue be conceived as a crime? He told those gathered that he should instead be rewarded for his actions, not penalized for it. Socrates told his audience that they were too absorbed with their families, their social lives, their careers, and even their political games, rather than the welfare of their souls, which should be the emphasis of their lives, with the other areas following a priority. When Socrates told them that God, in a singular sense, had chosen him as his divine emissary to present his idea, his audience became very enraged. Many began to ridicule him. Apparently, that was not considered acceptable. And so he said, maybe I should pay a small sum of money, but that was also unacceptable. And so his accusers won the day. The sentence was death. Next image. Socrates accepted his fate with dignity. He was taken to the nearby jail and was told to drink hemlock. Plato described what happened next in the Phaedo. When Crito heard, he signaled to the slave who was standing by. The boy went out and returned after a few moments with the man who was to administer the poison that he brought readily mixed in a cup. When Socrates saw him, he said, "Now, good sir, you understand these things. What must I do? Just drink it and walk around until your legs begin to feel heavy, then lie down, and it will soon act." With that, he offered Socrates the cup. The latter took it quite cheerfully, without a tremor, and no change of color or expression. He just gave the man his stolid look and asked, "How say you? Is it permissible to pledge this drink to anyone? May I?" The answer came, "We allow reasonable time in which to drink it." "I understand," he said. "We can and must pray to the gods that our sojourn on earth will continue happy beyond the grave. This is my prayer, and may it come to pass." With these words, he stoically drank the potion, and quite readily and cheerfully. And then, of course, Plato goes on to describe all his gradual symptoms of dying, describing him losing his feeling in his legs, and as it creeps up, it's just kind of like, okay, can you stop now? In fact, gets to the point, which is really sad. He becomes delirious. As the chill sensation got to his waist, Socrates uncovered his head. He had put something over it and said his last words, "Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Do pay it. Don't forget." "Of course," said Crito. "Do you want to say anything else?" There is no reply to this question, but after a while he gave a slight stir, and the attendant uncovered him and examined his eyes. Then Crito saw that he was dead. He closed his mouth with eyelids. This was the end of our friend, the best, wisest, and most upright man of any that I have known. So Socrates is gone. So this was so what's where remember Plato is his student. So where's Plato going to go now? Okay, so next image. When Socrates was gone, Plato attached himself to Critylus, who was a follower of Heraclitus of Ephesus, and also Parmenides. Now, Heraclitus of Ephesus is going to be also important now to understanding the beliefs of Plato. We're kind of creating and describing him through these teachers. So now the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus of Ephesus, from Ephesus, 535 to 475 BC, he's often given the rather ominous title the obscure. Um, he was considered very mysterious. He was yet another famous pre-Socratic philosopher from the Ionian coast in Asia Minor. The city of Ephesus, situated roughly north of Miletus, and eventually became more prominent than the birthplace of Thales. Moving against Thales with water as the primary element, um, Anaximander with an all-height organization, the four elements. What's going to happen is Heraclitus believed of the four elements, um, what he will do is focus on the idea that you have fire that is important as well as water. In fact, but he says that nature of all things is actually change. In fact, the nature of the reality is change, and change itself. Let's just look at me for a few moments. He says that the universe is like a river, for you cannot step in the same river twice, since it's always in a state of flux, of formation. So everything flows and nothing is still. Yet, what of the elements appears to be ever changing? And he says, fire. Of course, his version of the element of fire is steeped more in metaphor, representing either the cosmic fire or the Promethean fire that was given to humans in spite of Zeus's wishes. According to Clement of Alexandria, Heraclitus pronounced, quote, "This world order, the same for all, has neither the gods nor created a man, but she always was, is, and will it ever be. an ever living fire, kindled in measures under moderation. Clement also quotes Heraclitus as saying applications of fire. First, sea. The sea covered one half of the earth, the other half was covered in fire. The earth dissolves into the sea, and its size results in the same ratio as that which was before the earth was formed. And so fire is as important. Yet also, Heraclitus believed not only things were in flux as in fire, he also believed that there was an organizing principle in the universe known as the Logos, or the Word. Heraclitus declared, listening not to me, but to the Logos, it is wise to agree that all things are one. Sextus notes, according to Heraclitus, we became intelligent by drawing in this divine reason, this Logos, through breathing and forgetful when asleep, but when we regain our senses when we wake up again. For in sleep, when the channels of perception are shut, our mind is sundered from its kinship with the surrounding, and breathing is the only point of attachment to be preserved. Like a kind of root being sundered, our mind casts off its former power of memory. But in the waking state, it again peeps out through the channels of perception as though through a kind of window, and meeting with the surrounding, it puts on this power of reason. It's this reasoning principle. Okay, so what will happen is that there's this idea that there is this, he's also this idea that the Logos is and is not Zeus, and is this emanating power that creates. Now, what I find is fascinating is that, yes, Plato will use it, but instead of calling it the Logos, he will call it the Demiurge. He will call it the Maker. And so this is where that comes about. It comes from Heraclitus. What is fascinating is that later on, when Philo of Alexandria, who is a Jewish scholar who embraces Middle Platonism, when he takes in this idea, he turns it back. Although once he uses Demiurge, he turns it back from Demiurge back to Logos, even though he's still using the methodologies of Plato. And so in the beginning was this Logos that creates all things. And this is the form then that the Gospel of John takes in the beginning, the prologue there. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos, and the Word was with or uh, through God, and the Word was God. And so these ideas are kind of bouncing back together again. Is this making sense? So there you have it. But you also have this idea of constant motion, getting this from Heraclitus, that everything is always moving. You can't step in the same river twice. Things are always active. So it's a dynamic universe. It's the same dynamic universe that Plato has. Even though you have the solid forms that are there, you have these emanation moving down that are always moving. And so once again, Heraclitus is important. Good. Okay. Well, where do we go now? And you're thinking, okay, it looks like, right? It looks like it is time. Oh, I got to show you this next image. Sorry, one more of Heraclitus, the image there. So the next image, yeah. So there it is. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it is not the same river, and he's not the same man. And this is also the other interesting bit, is that we are always. I mean, what is reality? This kind of feels also almost like Eastern belief as well. The idea that everything is in flux, everything is in constant movement, and so we are always changing. We're not the same person as we were yesterday or last year or 10 years ago. We are always, even in a physical sense, the cells in our body, we're always going through this process of change. So what is reality then? Right? Because reality, what we are right at this moment is going to be changing by the time I finish this talk. We're going to be at a different place. We're always moving. So it is always in flux. So what is understood as real then is something that is always there beyond time. Oh, right. Getting pretty deep there. Okay. So you get the idea. Next image. All right. So now what happens now is that according to Aristotle, Plato becomes first acquainted with Critolus and his views on Heraclitus, um, um, right, of course, after Socrates, and says that the whole sensible world is always in a state of flux, and that there is no scientific knowledge of it. And after years, he still held these opinions, unquote. Aristotle also held that Critolus understood Heraclitus's flux theory in a more radical manner, that to describe something becomes almost a futile exercise, for by the time a person finishes their sentence, the thing has changed. I just had to say that one. So everything is so fast in flux that by the time you finish your sentence, everything is different now. Kind of feel that way nowadays, right? Okay. So you're thinking, okay, well, it's time for Plato to teach. Thank you. No. What? Next image. No, he's going to travel the world next. Huh? I thought he's supposed to no. So he's now 28 years old, and is he going to teach? No. Yeah, he's been doing the listening. Now the next phase is he's going to be doing the traveling. How long is he going to travel for? Well, he's 28 when he sets out traveling. He comes back to Athens when he's 40. So he's going to be gone 12, 13 years traveling around. I love that, right? I mean, it's a quiet guy, uh, soaks in all this information from all these great teachers, and then as opposed to just going right to teaching, now it's time to get the experience of the world, see the world and learn from it. Great method if you can afford it, right? So what happens here is according to Diogenes Laertius, then at the age of 28, according to Hermodorus, he withdrew to Megara to be with Euclides. Let's go to the next image. You see Megara right there on the left-hand side. This is an image of Megara, and with certain other disciples of Socrates. Next, according to Laertius, he proceeded to Cyrene. Next image. That's down there. And so, yeah, he's in what is now Libya to visit Theodorus. Theodorus, he's the mathematician, and thence he goes on to Italy. Next image. This is an image of Cyrene. Pretty cool looking, right? Next image. He goes on to Italy to see the Pythagorean philosopher Philolaus, who basically taught that who's basically a Pythagorean philosopher, and who taught that the foundation of everything is the part played by limiting and limitless, which combines into what is known as harmony. So, next image there. He meets with philosophers. He meets with leaders who apparently are not always thrilled with his teaching. That looks like somebody in my audience at times. Next image, and then he goes to Egypt. In fact, he spends a lot of time in Egypt, and so some people have him in Egypt. Because remember he's gone for 12, 13 years. Some people have him in Egypt for at least a decade, if not longer. I found a longer version of it. Strabo, uh, from the first century BCE to the first century CE, actually says uh, that Plato is in Egypt for 13 years. So that's a lot of time. So he's gaining knowledge. Most people don't know that, by the way. Hey, trivia, right? A lot of time in Egypt. So he was very interested in learning much of what the priests of Egypt had to say. No, I do want to say that he actually when he got to Egypt, he did fall sick for a period of time, and he was cured by the priests, uh, and they treated him with this seawater, and for this reason. he cited the line, quote, "The sea doth wash away all human ills," unquote. Furthermore, he said that according to Homer, beyond all men, the Egyptians were skilled in healing. So he's very interested in their medical knowledge. But so he's very interested in what the priests taught. Next image. So he went to a place known as Heliopolis. So this is kind of what Heliopolis used to look like. It's a pretty amazing place right there. And so there's a story that came through his own family about some of their mysteries. As I mentioned before, Plato's mother, Perictione, traced her lineage directly back to the great Solon. Now, accordingly, during his self imposed exile, intended to make the Athenians apply his constitution without forcing him to change it, remember that story? He traveled all about the Eastern Mediterranean, including Egypt. Here, like Plato later on, he spent time talking with the priests and investigating their archives. It was here Solon learned about Atlantis. The topic comes up in Plato's Timaeus, written about 360 BCE, where he learns that Solon and the Egyptian priests were comparing the gods of Greece with the gods of Egypt. At this point, Atlantis is brought up. Next image. The story, this is another image. This is Heliopolis. This is kind of what remains. You have that beautiful scene on the earlier slide, or are we in the 1970s, 1980s? The earlier image, we're showing slides. I love that. But you saw the obelisk in the hinterground. Well, this is the object here, the obelisk here. Next image. There we go. Okay, that's where I wanted to go. The story proceeds as follows. With the Egyptian priests saying of the Athenians, "Many great and wondrous deeds are recorded of your state in our histories, but one of them exceeds all the rest in greatness and valor. For these histories tell of a mighty power which, unprovoked, made an expedition against the whole of Europe and Asia, and to which your city put an end. This power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean. For in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Hercules. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way to the other islands, and from these you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent which surrounds the true ocean. For this sea, which is within the straits of Hercules, is only a harbor having a narrow entrance, but the other is a real sea, and the surrounding land may be truly called the boundless continent. Now, in this island of Atlantis, there was a great and wonderful empire which had ruled over the whole island and several others, and over parts of the continent. And furthermore, the men of Atlantis had subjugated the part of Libya within the columns of Hercules as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. So you have this idea of the Atlantean kingdom going into the Western Mediterranean and into the north part of Africa, and that would include, of course, Morocco today, Algeria, Tunisia, and then, of course, Libya, and then to Egypt, but also the southern coast of Spain, going into the south of France, and then, of course, to Italy and then beyond, right? So this is the claimed region, right? This next image. This vast power, gathered into one, endeavored to subdue at a blow our country and yours, and the whole of the region within the straits. And then Solon, your country, shone forth in the excellence of her virtue and strength amongst all mankind. She was preeminent in courage and military skill, and was the leader of the Hellenes. And when the rest fell off from her, being compelled to stand alone after having undergone the very extreme of danger, she defeated and triumphed over the invaders, and preserved from slavery those who are not yet subjugated, and generously liberated all the rest of us who dwell within the pillars. But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea, for which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way, and this was caused by the sustenance of the land. So there you have that. And so we have the story of Atlantis, which you didn't know is, yeah, it's a story that's connected to Solon, but Solon is related directly to Plato through his mother. So he is actually going to Heliopolis. Look at me for a second. He's going to Heliopolis, like many of us, to learn about family history and to go through the archives and learn about his own pedigree. And I find that interesting, right? And of course, we can go on because there Plato also mentions Atlantis in another place too, and it talks about how Poseidon is the great king and so forth, and a description of the city and the concentric circles and so forth and so on. There's a lot of details. So he does, but according to Plato, he's getting this information from Egypt. So understanding Atlantis, you have to understand that Egypt is the connective core within those legends. And I think there's a weakness that we oftentimes have where we always are considering the Greek context of the Atlantis myth and not trying to gain an understanding of the possible Egyptian understanding of that same legend during the time of the fourth and into the third centuries. This is interesting. So I mean, there's interesting possibilities here. Okay, following Egypt. Plato wished to travel to the east and converse with the priests of Zoroastrianism in Persia. By Diogenes Laertius notes, quote, Plato also intended to make the acquaintance of the magicians, but he was prevented by the wars in Asia. Now, at last, 40 years of age, very much marinated by his experience of listening for a long period of time and then traveling. Now, at last, it's his time to teach. So if you feel bad that you're older, let's say that you're in your 40s and your career hasn't started yet, and you feel like you don't have time to change the world, I got some good news. You got time to change the world because Plato started his career at 40. And was so successful that we have never been the same as a result of that. So Plato returned to Athens after his travels around the world. Having returned to Athens, he lived in the academy. Let's go to the next image. And so we're getting now to Plato's Academy, and I'll show you where it's located. I thought that'd be kind of cool. So you see, there's there on the right hand side, you see Athens. You go up, straight up, and there's the academy. And so you realize it's not directly in Athens; it's further away. Let's go to the next image. So the road to the academy is still there. So this is the road you would have taken. Obviously, the church and the modern buildings were not there, but the others are remnants from it. Let's go to the next image. There it is. Yeah, not much. So he lived there. There was a gymnasium outside the walls, said Diogenes Laertius, in a grove named after a certain hero by the name of Hecademus, as is stated by Eupolis in his play entitled The Shirkers. I think I'd like to see that play, The Shirkers. It says, in the shady walks of the divine Hecademus, unquote. Wherever there are verses of Timon, which refer to Plato, quote, amongst all of them, Plato was the leader, a big fish, but a sweet voiced speaker, musical in prose, as you can be, perched on the trees of Hecademus, pours forth a strain as delicate as a lily. So it's interesting that he went from a weak voice to a sweet voice. And if we understand the stories connected to Socrates, it happened kind of bloomed suddenly. And once again, if you feel like you don't have a strong voice, I can't do this, I can't talk to students, I can't converse, I can't have my voice heard. Once again, hey, Plato, right? Something can happen soon, right? Now, let's take a look. There's some other images here of the academy. There's a great image. Let's go to the next image. Okay, there we go. Well, while it's often asserted that Plato was a direct link to Socrates and carried on his teachings, we must also realize that he ascribed to many other philosophies and philosophers, intended to mix many of them together to create his own special, unique beliefs. Diogenes Laertius writes now Plato was a friend of Isocrates and Praxiteles, makes them converse about poets at a country seat where Plato was entertaining Isocrates. And he mentions all these other people he mixed up with him. Of course, we have Heraclitus. As for bits and pieces concerning his personality, Diogenes Laertius provides many clues. A story is told that Plato once saw someone playing at dice and rebuked him. And upon him protesting that he played for a trifle only, uh, he says, but the habit, rejoined Plato, is not a trifle. And so he says, yeah, you start small, but the addiction can possibly grow. And at one point, Plato advised those who got drunk to view themselves in a mirror, for they would then abandon the habit which so disfigured them. To drink to excess was nowhere becoming, he used to say, save at the feast of the god who was giver of wine. Now, thinking of him as being very solemn, but I think it's kind of funny that there is this exception. If it's for Dionysus, you can get drunk. So it's okay. So just don't try to make up every other day as a Dionysian day, and your liver and everything else will be okay. Furthermore, Plato also said that the truth is the pleasantest of sounds. Another version of the saying is that the pleasantness of all things is speaking the truth. Again, of truth he speaks thus in the laws. Truth, O stranger, is a fair and durable thing, but it is a thing of which it is hard to persuade men. It's hard to persuade people to follow the truth. Concerning his legacy, Diogenes Laertius writes, being asked whether there would be any memoirs of him as of his predecessors, he replied, a man must first make a name, and he will have no lack of memoirs. Unquote. Yet his, quote, wish always was to leave a memorial of himself behind, either in the hearts of his friends or in his books. He was himself fond of seclusion, according to some authorities, unquote. And that's from Diogenes Laertius. Excuse me. How Plato died is a matter of dispute. Let's look at me for a few moments. A matter of dispute. According to Tertullian, Plato died in his sleep in his own bed. A mutilated text of an unknown author adds that as he died, a young Thracian maiden played a flute to ease his passing. According to Hermippus, a 3rd century Alexandrian, as recorded by Diogenes Laertius, Plato was not only not in bed, he was actually at a wedding feast and he collapsed there. One of the oddest stories is also recorded by Diogenes Laertius, but Myronianus says that Philo mentioned some proverbs that were in circulation about Plato's lice, implying this was the mode of his death, that he died of his lice. I don't think so, but there you have it. As for his burial, he was buried in the academy where he spent the greatest part of his life in his philosophical studies, and hence the school which he founded was called the academic school. All the students there joined in the funeral procession. One epitaph on his tomb read, here lies the godlike man, eminent amongst men for temperance and the justice of his character. And he, if ever anyone had the fullest meed of praise for wisdom, was too great for envy. Another proclaimed, Earth in her bosom here hides Plato's body, but his soul hath its immortal station with the blessed, Ariston's son, whom every good man, even if he dwells afar off, honors because he discerned the divine life. Diogenes Laertius even makes up his own. Phoebus gave to mortals Asclepius, and Plato the one to save their souls, the other to save their bodies. From a wedding banquet he has passed on to the city which he had founded for himself and planted himself into the sky. So there you have it. Now, there's more. I got to tell you, within the last 2 years, there's been more. 2 years. This is really up to date. Let's go to the images. So, what has happened is they found in Herculaneum a document. That's the document. What did they find? Next image. So, they found a papyrus that was inked by Philodemus of Gadara, a poet and philosopher from the area of Herculaneum. And we find from this document that Plato was buried on the grounds of the academy. Uh, and but we thought that his precise uh, place of burial was unknown. However, according to this text, it appears that Plato was buried in a private garden near the Academy's shrine to the Muses. And so we have found within the last couple years where Plato was exactly buried. That's a big deal. Big deal when it comes to Platonic studies. Let's go to the next image. Also, they found that there's other details that Plato was sold into slavery, either 404 BCE or 399 BCE. Around 387, the scroll also discussed Plato's final night. So we got more on him. He was running a high fever and was bothered by the music they were playing. Next image. Also, he was playing the flute to help ease the old philosopher's final hour, but Plato didn't like the music. He told the musician she had scant sense of rhythm. So I'm sorry, but we got more on Plato within the last couple of years, and it sounded nice and poetic that that she's playing this flute for him, but apparently we find out now after all these years that he was really irritated by the whole thing. Okay, let's go back to me. So there you got that. More information than you ever wanted. Let's go a little bit more into his philosophy. Although, if you hadn't noticed, I've been threading his philosophy the whole time by telling the story. So when I talk about various ideas, you're like, "Oh, I've heard this before." So there you go. But I had to mention that. Okay. Obviously, a need to define Platonism. According to many philosophers of antiquity, much of Plato's views relating to religion and spirituality were carried on via oral tradition. These unwritten doctrines, in many ways, help nuance certain views already briefly discussed in Plato's surviving writings. With that said, for the most part, Plato's central tenets are still to be uncovered within his writings that have survived, especially the Timaeus. Much of Plato's beliefs are based on intensive conviction in the very real existence of unchanging and eternal realities or forms that are independent of the changing things of the physical world as perceived by our limited sensory perceptions. In a sense, next image, there are two worlds: the realm of the forms and the realm of the cosmos. The cosmos consists of this lower physical world, while the world of the forms represent the upper non-physical world. The world appearing to our senses is in many ways defective and filled with error. Go back to Diotima and love. Remember the whole thing? Now seeing the connection? According to Plato, this physical world of the cosmos, The world where we live or occupy is a world of constant becoming, constant change. Ah, here Heraclitus of Ephesus. See, connections and connections. Everything in this world comes to be and passes away, but never really is, he says in Timaeus. And boy, Heraclitus of Ephesus would be smiling pretty wide on that one. Everything being fleetingly comprehended by opinion and sense perception. The physical cosmos was created using the world of forms as a model or ideal pattern. Let's go to the next image. There we go. And so Plato's theory of forms is, according to Plato, the world we live in is a poor imitation of the real world. Our world is constantly, as we talked about, changing, and we rely on our senses to understand what's going on. But you are not the same person you were 3 years, hours, seconds ago. Cells are forever changing. Ideas fit through our minds. Excuse me. Just like that word. Plato was therefore sure that the real world is outside of the one we live in because this one constantly changes. This real world is unchanging and eternal. It is the world of ideas, not senses, where there are perfect forms of the things we know on earth. Next image. What Plato means by the forms is that they are the essential archetypes of things, having an internal existence apprehended by the mind, not the senses, for it is the mind that beholds real existence, colorless, formless, intangible, visible only to the intelligence. So, therefore, the physical cosmos was created using the world of forms as a model or ideal, as a pattern. For Plato, the cosmos has a soul and exists as a unique living being because it is made in the image of the form of living beings. But it's also limited because it's created out of matter, and it's temporal because it exists within time and is defined by it, right? I mean, think about it. Think about how quick life is. Just in the blink of an eye, right? Time goes by so fast. And so existence, reality, has to be something outside of this constantly moving, shifting realm, right? You can take this down. I'll talk a little bit here. Thank you very much. So the other world, beyond the physical, is the world of forms, which is more real and perfect as a realm, populated by these entities, these forms, these ideas that he asserts are eternal, that are changeless, and yet in some sense paradigmatic for the structure and character of our world. Amongst the most important of these abstract objects, as they are now called because they're not located in time and space, are the idea of goodness, of beauty, of equality, of bigness, of likeness, of unity, of being, of sameness, of difference, of change, of changelessness. The only true being is found upon the forms, the eternal, the unchangeable, perfect types of which particular objects of sense are imperfect copies. Apparently, those who don't believe in this theory are proponents of form criticism. Kidding. I'm sorry. That was bad. Just kidding. Just trying to maintain my image. So, hey, got to have a humor break somewhere on. Okay, I'm stopping. For Plato, ultimately, all moves towards the one. Let's go to the next image. Maybe this will help. So you have this idea of beauty. It's the form of beauty. Then you have the concept of beauty. And then you have the individual beautiful entities. And then from there, imitations of beautiful entities, paintings, photos, reflections, shadows. So this is the feeling, kind of the idea, right? See how that works? So next image. And so what happens now is for Plato, ultimately all moves into the one, the monad, knowable through reason, that can be attained by drawing upon innate ideas within us, that these ideas are sown naturally within us, that it is an intuition, that there is something greater, that there is a sense of order, that the universe has some kind of unity in movement and in form, that there is some prevailing spirit within all things. The one is both absolute and transcendent. This one is the highest form of all and is essentially the form of the good. That doesn't mean necessarily how we understand the good, but it's the idea of good being that which is ordered, the first cause of being and knowledge, and the ultimate pattern for all others to follow. So you see here, you can be called the monad, the one, the beautiful, cause of knowledge, cause of existence, super real, transcends being, limit and unity. So, moves beyond limit and unity, just keeps on going, this flowing out, right? And of course, you can see as you go through here, you got the ideal numbers. And then, these are the realm of ideas. You got numbers, and then you have concepts like justice, equality, etc. You got particulars, right? Ideas, and the mathematical ideas, the elements, earth, air, fire, water. And then you move down to these emanations. You go to the realm of sense, right? Particular phenomena, becoming and change and artistic depictions, and of course into the dyad. So you have these constant moving. Now, a word often used for this one, as I mentioned, is monad, a Greek word deriving from both unit, monas, and monos, which means alone. So it's a unit, but it's also alone. Because the one is the highest form of all, toward which all has its ultimate beginning and end, Plato's ethics is based on the form of the good. Within this context, virtue is knowledge, or gnosos, as in Gnosticism, right? Gnosos, the complete and full recognition of the supreme form of the good. Thus, when we are in good form, we really are good. It's another joke, but it's true. Okay, so it's a kind of double. In essence, then, Plato's physical universe, as reflected from the realm of idea, is still essentially good. Okay, so I got that. So you get this concept. Now, let's just go to the next one because it's kind of a fun image. There's a lighter one for your consumption, right? There we go. We do have a quote from ancient times because I got to substantiate this, right? So, Diogenes Laertius summarizes. He says, "And there is this is from ancient times, right? And this is a quote. And there is one created universe, seeing that it is perceptible to sense, which has been made by God, and it is animate because that which is animate is better than that which is inanimate. And this piece of workmanship is assumed to come from a cause supremely good. It was made one and not unlimited because the pattern form from which it made it was one. And it is spherical because such is the shape of its maker." Now we're moving now into the idea of a maker. Let's go. We'll stay here for a few seconds. It is smooth and has no organ all around it because it has no need of organ. So what's happening now is they're going into, there's got to be something that still creates the lower realm. What are we going to call this? Well, Heraclitus of Ephesus called it the Logos. Well, what's going to happen is that Plato is going to call it the Demiurge, uh, which means creator, or literally means craftsman. Let's go to the next image. There we go. The creator artistically impresses the pre-existing form on a formless material realm. Got it? The creator artistically impresses the pre-existing form on a formless material realm. Since the physical world, by necessity of being material based, must have bodily form and must be visible and tangible, according to Timaeus 31. Because of that, its ingredients must include earth and fire. But earth and fire, because of their nature of being solids, need two intermediaries to combine them. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem between earth and fire. And so the Demiurge created air and water, and arrange all four elements proportionally, as fire is to air, air is to water, as air is to water, water is to earth. And that way, there is this balance. Diogenes says the universe is composed of fire, water, air, and earth, of fire in order to be visible, of earth in order to be solid, of water and air in order to be proportional. For the powers represented by solids are connected by two mean proportionals in a way to secure the complete unity of the whole. And the universe was made of all the elements in order to be complete and indestructible. So you have these elemental ideas. The realm of ideals emanating from the monad would often become known as the pleroma. Oh, let's go to the next image because I just want to show you this. So with these elements, you have shapes. So you got the octahedron, right? You got air, cube, earth, tetrahedron, fire, dodecahedron, right? You see there, you got the universe and the icosahedron. Of course, you have the water. So you have these concepts of the elements also connected to these divine shapes. And because I'm a sucker for great imagery, let's go to the next one. There we go. I just had to, couldn't resist. So you get the various shapes. So these are the Platonic solids moving through. Okay, let's go to the next image. And then you have this idea, even though this is kind of Christianized a little bit there, but this is the idea of, I still think it's pretty, this is the idea of the emanating pleroma, moving out, moving forth from the one. And that's, so all in all, right there. The realm of ideals emanating from the monad will be called the pleroma, the fullness. This connection rooted in discussions of the universe as related to the demiurge in Plato's Timaeus. So this is where it comes from. And then, of course, it gets more nuanced as time goes on. All in all, Plato believes the works of intellect, which is nous, directs his creation with an eye towards what is best. Here, Plato turns to the old pre-Socratic question, what is the world made of? His answer both combines and transcends theirs. It means the traditional earth, air, fire, water of the philosopher Empedocles, but he goes beyond them, analyzing them in terms of mathematical objects, which connects ideas of Pythagoras, and empty space, which, of course, we see that with various automatists, right? When the demiurge created the universe, he also creates time. Plato's text reads, the demiurge began to think of making a moving image of eternity. At the same time as he brought order to the universe, he would make eternal image, moving according to number, of eternity remaining in unity. This, of course, is what we call time. For Plato, time is a certain kind of motion rather than a measure of motion, as stated in 38D and 39D. The demiurge, he says, brought into being the sun, the moon, and five other stars for the beginning of time. These are called the wanderers. And of course, I want to say that the Greek word, let's look at me for a few seconds. The Greek word here, wanderers, is planeta. So that's where we get the word planet from. So, and they stand guard over the numbers of time. And so people are all but ignorant of the fact that time really is the wandering of these bodies. As you can see, Plato connects time with the wanderings of these celestial bodies, their movements, and not a kind of number that measures such movements. In contrast, the forms which are everlasting is and was and will be, according to Plato, they're outside of time. And so they are still, they are static, right? And that makes them really real. What is illusionary is that which keeps changing, that keeps moving, including ourselves. But which is really real is something that's always there, that is solid. So you can see how these ideas are putting together. The demiurge created four kinds of creatures. First, heavenly gods. The next, of course, winged things. Third, water creatures. And finally, land creatures. In fact, the universe itself is alive, according to Plato. It's animate. Uh, Diogenes also says further, quoting from ancient times, further, the universe is an animate being, for it is bound fast in animate movement, and in order that the universe, which has been created in the likeness of the intelligible living creature, might be rendered complete, the nature of all other animals was created. Since then, its pattern possesses them, the universe also ought to have them. And thus it contains gods, for the most part, of a fiery nature. Of all the rest, there are three kinds: winged, aquatic, and terrestrial. And of all the gods in heaven, the earth is the oldest. Of course, that's Gaia. And it was fashioned to make night and day. And being at the center, it moves around the center. And since there are two causes, it must be affirmed, he says, that some things are due to reason and other things have a necessary cause, the latter being air, fire, earth, and water, which are not exactly elements, but rather recipients of form. They are composed of triangles and are resolved into triangles, and it goes on and on. So it's interesting. Now we go on to the soul. The unique human soul is created by the gods as instructed by the demiurge. Oh no, now we have another problem. What is the human soul? What is it? For Plato, the soul was quite separate from the physical shell of the body, of the flesh, and while the soul is in essence attached to the body, the circumstances are less than ideal. Still, according to Plato, as demonstrated in his Phaedo, the soul is indeed immortal, a condition quite unlike the physical body, which will soon fall away into decay and non existence. And so it has a similarity with the realm above, right? A similarity. Its eternal aspect connects to those eternal forms and beyond, which is very important because, in that sense, we are a reflection, even though not perfect, of that which is beyond. Our soul is. But not only am I a reflection of that, not only is, are other people, we are all reflections, all have that soul of the ultimate beyond, which means is that through our souls, every one of us are born equal. See how we all have the soul, every one of us, and they're all eternal across the board. And anything material, hierarchies and money and materialism makes no difference because they're always changing. What doesn't change is that spark that's in us, and that gives us that sense of equality. Also, because we're imperfect, if we choose, we can become more and more into those higher forms. We can change, we can evolve, which means that we are capable of progress. We are made in the image of that which is beyond. This will be later on understood as we are made in the image of the gods, in the image of God. And as a result, we are all equal. And therefore, if we're all equal, we all have inalienable natural rights. And that goes into political theory that really sparked into Platonism, into the Renaissance, and then, of course, into the 18th century. Is this helpful? Are you seeing these connections? Well, that's a huge idea. It's a big one. And Plato's at the center of it. Of course, um, I will also want to mention the fact that as you go further down, you move towards its opposite. What do you mean? Okay, so you have the realm of that which is spirit, and so the opposite would be the realm of that which is material. Makes sense? You have that which is the realm of beauty, and the further you emanate down, it becomes the opposite, which is not ugly, but is chaos, okay? Because it's not structured. You have this idea of the good, and then it goes into the area of the absence of good. You have the area of knowledge, and so you move into the realm of lack of knowledge or ignorance. You have the idea of truth, and then you move into the area of non truth. righteousness, unrighteousness. Is this interesting? Right? You got life, death. You have this opposites. So what happens now is you have that's all in the that a lot of those ideas come into the prologue of the Gospel of John. Got it? Wow, darkness, light. Is this helpful? So this dualism is again, which defines so much of Western society. How are we doing? Right? Is this helpful? Okay, let's keep on going. As to the soul's prior existence, Plato's Meno says that the individual soul is able to recollect what occurred before its birth, especially in remembering the primal forms. Also, the lives we currently experience are to some extent a punishment or reward for choices we made in a previous existence, as noted at the end of Plato's Republic. So, what you have here is almost an idea that sounds like karma, right? That what the actions that you do here and now will determine where you will go in your next life. Will you evolve up or will you evolve down? As for the soul's continued existence, Plato, in his Phaedrus and other dialogues, revealed that he definitely believed in the transmigration of souls, which of course is reincarnation. This is popular. We even have this in later Roman beliefs in Virgil's Aeneid, where they have this afterlife of rewards and punishments. And then, of course, after going to either the Elysium realm for the good or to Tartarus for the bad, then after 1,000 years, they're all resurrected. And they all drink from the waters of Lethe, the waters of forgetfulness, and they're reborn again. This is just, well, we're going to go over briefly. Plato has something of this too in detail. The Greek use of the word metempsychosis for the concept of transmigration of souls was already deeply part of Greek thought, especially a belief system known as Orphism, the Orphic rites. And it turns out we know that Plato was also into the Orphic rites. And of course, obviously, this goes back to Pythagoras and the idea that there's freedom from the wheel of constant birth and rebirth occurs via knowledge or a philosophical awakening, which Plato will talk about too in the Allegory of the Cave. According to Timaeus, each soul is assigned to a star. At the moment of death, Plato believed that a just soul returns to its companion star, while an unjust soul is reincarnated for the second try or third or so forth. When the soul is free of the material abode or is not consistently distracted by its impurities, it is able to comprehend the nature of forms far more easily. But what will happen is we do know he is aware of the Orphic mysteries. And so, in the end, as opposed to after going through a Tartarus or Elysium or whatever it may be, as opposed to drinking from the waters of forgetfulness of Lethe, you are taught to drink from the lake of memory, in which you remember everything, all your past lives, and as a result, you ascend. You're free, and there is this idea of becoming amongst the stars, and this idea is echoing here. Plato's best description of how the soul operates is his allegory of the chariot. So let's go to the next image. Yeah, there it is. So the soul has three parts. You have the rational, you have the spirited, and you have the appetitive. For the rational, the drive is the logic and the body, and it loves truth and wisdom. So its virtue, therefore, is wisdom, but its vice is pride. For the spirited aspect, the drive is emotion. It's the heart, and it loves honor and victory, and virtue is courage. But however, since it is very emotional, anger and envy is the opposite. And finally, the appetitive. This is desire, the belly and genitals, food and love, right? And of course, it loves pleasure. Virtue is moderation, but of course, it can become just a little bit greedy there. So, next image. So Plato, starting point for his divisions of the soul is the different classes he observed in society. Plato started with noting that what motivated people, desires, needs, and wants. So these wants could be qualified or unqualified. For example, someone who was thirsty could just want a drink or a particular type of drink. The first type was appetitive, whereas the second type was reflective and rational. Next, he noted that young children showed signs of rationality despite their youth. He attributed this to the spirited part of the soul, which kept the appetitive part of the soul in check. The spirited part of the soul had an affinity to the rational part of the soul, but was quite distinct and separate. So Plato will explain this at the tripartite division of the chariot allegory. Let's go to the next image. That's where we're going next. It's a spindle of necessity. Okay, so here he goes. Thank you so much, Margie. Sorry. Like, oh, too far. I guess I missed that one bit there. Accordingly, the famous allegory of the chariot goes as follows. First, the charioteer of the human soul. So the charioteer of the human soul drives a pair. And secondly, one of the horses is noble and of noble breed, but the other quite the opposite in breed and character. Therefore, in our case, the driving is necessarily difficult and troublesome. According to Plato, the chariot guiding the two horses with his reins is intellect and reason, concerned with guiding the soul towards the truth. The noble white horse embodies the positive drives of passion motivated by morality or rational thought to accomplish that which is good. The other black horse is more irrational, emotional, feeling various passions and wishing to follow them wherever they may lead, often without restraint. This horse is all about its appetites and satisfying them. It kind of reminds me of those old stories, in contemporaneous like cartoons, where you got the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. It's like this idea of temptation. The challenge for the chariot driver, who's trying to be as rational as possible, is to keep both of them in line and focused on the goal of enlightenment. Some souls cannot control that black horse, the base physical impulses, which will bring the chariot of the soul out of the great circuit amongst the form and down upon the earth to, yes, incarnate again, to reincarnate again. It just, watch out for that black horse. We're going down. We're going to live another life here. Plato saw 9 categories of possible incarnation amongst human souls. Number 1, you got philosophers, lovers of beauty, men of culture, or those dedicated to love. So that's actually the first one. I like that one, right? I'll say it again. Philosophers, lovers of beauty, men of culture, or those dedicated to love. Number 2, law-abiding kings or civic leaders. 3, politicians, estate managers, or businessmen. Number 4, ones who specialize in bodily health. Okay. So that would be doctors. Number 5, prophets or mystery cult participants. That's kind of a cool one, right? Number 6, poets or imitative artists. Number 7, craftsmen or farmers, because they're always forging, making things. Number 8, sophists or demagogues. Number 9, tyrants. If, however, both the white horse and black horse are controlled and working together, this ability to rein in, you got to rein it in, both horses leads to enlightenment and a release from the coil of fate. Is that okay? That's pretty interesting. So, do you guys feel like you can relate with this one? Just a little bit. So you kind of have to ask the question. Which horse is in control? Is it the black horse? Is it the white horse? You got to get them working together. The most famous. Now we go to the next step. The most famous story regarding Plato's views of the afterlife is the one regarding E-R, in Book 10 of the Republic. The story begins with a certain and so what happens? Is that dies in battle. Following the collecting of the corpses from the battlefield 10 days later, They discover undecomposed body. A couple of days later, revives while on his own funeral pyre, which is just in time, and he began to tell the tale of where he had been while apparently deceased. Traveling with other recently deceased souls, encounters a strange metaphysical crossroads with four openings, two proceeding into and out of the sky, and two proceeding into and out of the earth. Besides these mythical portals were judges who were instructing the souls which direction they were meant to follow. Those considered righteous by the judges were told to proceed to the way leading to the sky, while those who were wicked were told to follow the path leading to the underworld. Yet was made an exception by the judges and given the mission to simply uh, tell what he sees for the land of the living. As he's given these instructions, notices that while some souls were going up one of the sky portals, other souls were going down through the other one. These souls from the latter opening in the sky arrived spotless and pure, telling all about the beautiful places they've seen and how wonderful they felt. Meanwhile, in like harmony, one portal of the earth received souls while the other released them. Those that returned from below appeared filthy, worn down, and exhausted, weeping in utter and complete despair, while all along telling about the horrors they had witnessed and were party to. In fact, each soul was required to pay a tenfold penalty for all the wicked deeds committed while alive. Yet those that emerged were the lucky ones, for many were not permitted to ever leave this underground nightmare, especially those who were killers and tyrants. After a little stay in the meadow of the soul, was instructed to continue his underworld journey and eventually reached a place he and the accompanying souls could observe a rainbow shaft of light brighter than any other they had seen before. Next image, please. This prism of spectacular radiance was known as the spindle of necessity, where Lady Necessity and her daughters and many sirens happened to be there. They organized the souls into rows and were each one handed a lottery token except for Next, each soul was ordered to come before the ladies and choose their next life. Recalled the first to choose a new soul, a man who had not experienced the terrors of the world before, but who had received his rewards in the world above. Unfortunately, he decided to seek power of place in the next life, choosing an authoritative dictatorship. Suddenly, a dark realization thrust its weight upon his soul when he realized to his own horror that he was doomed to commit terrible crimes in his next life, even to eat his own children. According to he beat his breasts, blaming God, the stars, and everyone except himself. In this case, he had been virtuous in the previous life, yet his virtue had been merely customary, only a facade, without foundation upon a consciously realized principle. That's important. So this person, while he has a semblance of being good and righteous, really deep in his character, he is undefined. He hasn't taken time to understand who he is. Noticed that those who had arrived via the path in the sky chose darker fates often for their next life, while the ones who arrived via the path from the earth chose better lives. Most selected lives quite different from their previous lives. Just happened to be accompanying the soul of Odysseus. He declared, I observed how Odysseus reflected upon the hollowness and uncertainty of fame, the batterings of endless journeys and treacherous adventures. This time he decided to look for an easier lot with less heartache and tragedy. Sure enough, he picked up the cosmic contract for a quiet man's life, the one that had been rejected by the other souls. Although Odysseus happened to be the last to make a choice, he said, I would have done the same even if I had drawn the first lot. He also saw that the soul of Epius, the son of Panopeus, who was known in the Trojan cycle for being a great warrior and for designing the Trojan horse as commissioned by Odysseus and instructed by Athena, as passing into the nature of a woman cunning in the arts. So a craftswoman. Next image. So you have so it's not just male to male, it's male female. It goes across. This is a pretty cool image. In another instance, Orpheus recalled how he had been murdered by a woman in his previous life. As a consequence, Orpheus had hatred of women. It influenced his decision to be reborn as a swan rather than entering a woman's womb. So you can choose to become an animal. In fact, observed that animals were indeed also present before the spittle of necessity, and hence had souls as well. He noted that these animals often chose human lives, while humans often chose the lives of animals, many of them believing they were much easier than that of being human. We hear that all the time with cats, right? Oh, man. Um, I must stress that the choice for the next life, even if accomplished through a kind of lottery in this depiction, is still a personal decision. They all had a choice, yet their choices were made based upon their overall character of their soul. So it's all about the character. If you have a character of souls, you've got nothing to worry about, right? But if you haven't taken time to get to know your character, then of course you'll slip back and forth, very much like samsara, like the wheel of birth, life, and death, and rebirth in Hinduism. And through your actions, if you're good actions, karma, good actions, you move up. If you do bad actions, you move down. But sometimes like a buffer pattern, we're up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, because we haven't developed our character. So we're stuck. And one life we're good, next life we're bad, back forth, and we just stay in the same place forever and ever. And so the best way to get out of that is to, of course, advance the soul. Following the selection process, each individual soul was assigned a deity to help them through their life, passing the throne of lady necessity. The soul and continued on to the plane of oblivion. Everybody gets a deity to guide them, a one to guide them through. Passing the throne of lady necessity, the souls and continued on to the plane of oblivion. Next image. Where the rivers of forgetfulness, river Lethe, flowed. Each soul was then required to drink of the water in varying quantities apart from As they drank, each soul immediately forgot everything. As they lay down at night to sleep, each soul was lifted up into the night in various directions for rebirth, completing their journey. According to this entire journey of the soul from one life to incarnation in the next lasts 1,000 years. So that's how long it takes. So there's a break in between each. By the way, Virgil and his Aeneid does the same thing. It's 1,000 years. And of course, now we go. I promised, and this is we'll do very light after this, but I want to make sure that we get to, yes, the allegory of the cave. And that will be the last one. Here we go. Okay, perhaps the most famous philosophical story is Plato's Allegory of the Cave. In his Republic, here we are intended to imagine prisoners chained since childhood, residing deep inside this dark cave. Not only are their limbs powerless because of the heavy chains upon them, but even their heads are chained in such a manner as to ensure that their eyes are fixed squarely upon the back wall of the cave, permitting little deviation to the left or right, and especially securing any possible ability to turn around. Behind the prisoners, in the direction of the mouth of the cave, is positioned this massive fire blazing away. Now, between the fire and the prisoners stand an elevated walkway, along which shapes of various animals, plants, and other things are carried back and forth in regular progressions. These ever moving shapes and forms cast shadows on the back wall of the cave that naturally occupied the prisoner's full attention. Furthermore, when one of the shape carriers speak, the sound of the voice produces an echo against the wall and makes the prisoners believe that these utterances arrive not from the world of the forms, but from the realm of the shadow. For these prisoners, the realm of shadow, of fleeting forms, moving to and fro in the darkness, is only reality that they know. They are not even able to see the images, but are condemned to see merely the shadows of the images. So we always see is the shadow, next image, shadow of true existence. Now Plato begins to speculate, presenting a curious scenario, whereby he ponders what would occur if one of the prisoners are released and are able to stand up and turn around. Basing his observations on the obvious, he readily admits that the prisoner's eyes will instantly be blinded by the bright fire. When his eyes begin to adjust, he will notice that the shapes or forms passing by will manifest a reality quite distinct from his recollections of them as mere shadows cast upon the back wall of the former cave imprisonment. Typically, the person who is doing this is indeed the true philosopher. When a true philosopher realizes that all they're seeing of reality is basically a shadow of what reality is, that realization is what frees that person of their chains so they can turn around. And if he continues moving beyond the raised platform of shapes, next image, and the fire and leaves the dark cave, he will be cast into the blazing sunlight. Of course, in response to the sun's overpowering radiance, the former prisoner's eyes will be so overpowered by this brilliant stimulus that he will become temporarily blinded, unable to see anything. After a while, he'll be able to see darker objects, much like the shadows before, but in time, he will be able to make out lighter objects. At the culmination of this revelation, next image, the former prisoner will be able to see the sun itself. He will soon recognize that the sun, this brilliant orb of infinite life, is the center of all, the great eminence causing all to move about it, including the seasons and the courses of the year. In fact, he will realize this light not only presides over all things in the visible region, it is also the definitive form from which all else is illuminated. Once enlightened, literally and spiritually, and all places in between, the free prisoner will feel this impulse to return to the cave in order to free his fellow bondsmen. Next image. There's the light. But there is a distinct problem in that the other prisoners might not want to be freed. There's also a challenge since descending back into the cave is will make him his eyes be darkened. He will stumble around the shadows like a drunk man, and he will look like he's crazy. Right. Next image. And so, will they want to follow him? Well, the problem is that it will be looked at as foolishness. He will try to explain, but they will not believe, and they will hate him, and they will kill him. Let's look at me for a few moments. So here we have it. So what will happen is that while he will go and receive enlightenment, he will understand the nature of the universe when he returns back to those people who only see reality as that shadow on the cave. They are unable to even comprehend this larger existence. He will sound like he is a raving lunatic because they are so limited in their perception, right? For the light comprehends the light, and the darkness comprehends the darkness. But the darkness cannot comprehend the light, or in this case, the darkness is unwilling to comprehend the light, unwilling to permit the light to illuminate its darkness, to eradicate its dark ignorance with illumination and with wisdom and knowledge. Eventually, the other prisoners, as I said, will want to kill him. The shadows are all they know, it's all they see. The shadows, therefore, are reality. They see him as a liar. They see him as a charlatan. We have so many today. that are unwilling to understand that which is righteous, that which is truth, that which is beauty. For them, their minds are dim. They are, as they seem to be, looking at the back of this cave. This allegory is hard. Another interpretation is that first one has to awaken as if from a dream. The dream we call life. We have to break those bonds. This is unlike awakening epiphany to that part of Gnosticism. It's a hard thing to do. This all reminds me of taking the red pill in the Matrix, right? We become aware of the webs that influence and moves us, the shadows of the wall. We realize the temporary nature of life, how it constantly moves from facade to facade. We begin to recognize that much of the things that so consumes our time, our very existence, is but rubbish, empty vanities, and hollow pursuits. They're indeed treasures that succumb to dust and rust. Finally, we see the truth for what it truly is, the sun and the world outside the cave. Our instinct and natural desire is to be free, but it also is to free others, to awaken them to the truth. But doing so seems to be so futile, for they cannot see past the illusions and will only attack the truth bearer. This also reminds me of the Styx song, right? A grand illusion. And truly, it is all a mere grand illusion, where all is infused with materialism, with no better than, well, that stuff. Stuff, of course, I mean, what I said from the very start, the very fillers of fillers, right? That yawning, vague chasm that claims to envelop much truth, but actually has nothing. In short, Plato presents an ultimate source or monad that may be perceived as a deity, which in turn emanates the rest of creation via the forms and the craftsman and demiurge. Yet everything is made to reflect this one who is absolute good and perfection and eternal. All is made of it and the image it radiates. This realm of the form is spirit, while the realm below it is material. This realm above is light, while the realm below is darkness. This realm above is good, while the realm below is corruption. Yet the soul within humanity, although embodied in a flesh that is limited, imperfect, and corrupt, has the ability to decipher, to know, and to understand that there is a realm above and is ultimately more part of it than the realm below. For Plato, this source of all the forms, this ultimate good, this emanating sun, this monad, is the end and the beginning for all for which we should strive for. And that's where I will close. Where we started is where we end. And I hope we have some semblance of understanding the importance of Plato. I just played around, talked about various themes. I could go on to ideas of justice. I can go on to his political theory, but then that would be another 2 or 3 hours. But I figured that I would focus on his metaphysical views because these views become so deeply entrenched, not only within so many different belief systems of antiquity, but even it is brought back during the Renaissance. And then, of course, it's so important to ideas that we have today. This idea that, yeah, uh, that we can have, we are all made in an image of something that is beyond. That while we are mutable, we change, we still have something in us, the spark that continues on, and that ultimately we are all equal before it. Thank you so much.